Thank y'all so much for being here. I'm so excited about our conversation today. I think it's a very important conversation, and I'm so glad that each of y'all is here to join us in this. I wanted to start off just by introducing ourselves. So my name is Marilyn Lee. I'm the Executive Director of Loving Houston, and I'll go ahead and introduce our team members here also real quick. I love our team, and so if y'all haven't gotten to know them yet, I'm looking forward to see y'all get to know them too. But Mel is our Director of Operations. Melissa is our Lamar Consolidated District Coordinator. BJ is our Houston ISD District Coordinator. Brittany is our Humble ISD District Coordinator. Allie is our Klein ISD District Coordinator. And Tawana is our Fort Bend ISD District Coordinator. We're going to start with our panel on racial reconciliation, and then we'll move into a time of questions. And then finally, we're going to take some time to pray over all of the things that we're talking about today because it's a lot. All right. So I'm going to do a quick introduction about Loving Houston just to familiarize you all with it. We were started about 7 years ago with this idea that we really wanted to help churches to love Houston better. And I feel like this has been heightened so much in the past several weeks and months, but there is so much pain and so much brokenness, so much discord in our world all around us. Our city is hurting, our country is hurting, our world is hurting in so many ways. But we know as Christians that the only one who can fully heal us is Jesus. So how do we as Christians love our neighbors in a way that is really grounded in this hope? I love that God has called each of us as believers to be ministers of reconciliation. And if we are truly looking to love and transform our communities in Jesus' name, there is no better place to start than with our children. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. To reach our children, there is no better place to serve than in our schools. Our mission Loving Houston is to advance community transformation by helping churches to serve local schools. And just a quick definition. So this is what we believe is a church school partnership. It's a committed relationship between a church and a school in which both parties work together for the well-being and academic success of the students. So I don't know if y'all can tell what this is, but it's a map of Greater Houston, and every single one of these dots is a public school. So every single neighborhood has a school that the children in the community attend. So connecting every single one of these schools with a committed, caring church partner allows the love of Jesus to be shown in every community across Greater Houston. So what do we do at Loving Houston? We inspire, we equip, we resource churches to build long-term relationships with local schools so that every student, every parent, every teacher can experience the love of Jesus in a tangible way. So in Houston, in Greater Houston, there are about 1,500 schools, which feels kind of daunting. You saw that map earlier. But praise God that there are at least 3,500 churches here in the area. So if you do the quick math, it's absolutely possible for every single school to have at least one church partner, if not more, loving the students and teachers and families in Jesus' name. So today we're talking about racial reconciliation. And some of y'all might be wondering, why are we talking about this when Loving Houston is about church school partnerships? Honestly, I think a lot of that is going to be answered during our panel today. But Brittany has been sharing something really powerful in our 101 workshops recently. Everything that we're seeing today, the murders, the protests, the tensions, all of that, our children are seeing it also. And as much as it's affecting us emotionally, mentally, physically, it's affecting our kids also. And all of the systems that are in place that are resulting in these situations and events, they're affecting our children. And so if we do not change the trajectory we're on, the same things are going to be happening 10, 20, 50, 100 years down the road. And I do not want to see our children our children's children, our children's children's children seeing the same thing when we can do something about it today. And so I want to introduce Brittany now. Again, she is our amazing Humble ISD district coordinator. She is a former educator and serves as a lay leader with her church, Higher Expectations Church. She is a woman of the word and of prayer, and I love having Brittany on our team. So she is going to be opening our time today with prayer and then closing our time with prayer today at the end as well. So take it away, Brittany.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Loving Houston July Leaders Gathering. I want to first honor our distinguished guests who will be leading us today, and I want to thank you all for being here and investing time into the work of fixing the racial problems that have plagued our country for so long. So some time has passed since the issue of race has been a hot topic. And it's funny how a few weeks after a changed news cycle, we could forget about what was of primary importance just a short while ago. So many of the protests have stopped, and we're not seeing a lot of news coverage on race anymore. It almost feels like things are back to normal. But unfortunately, normal for some of us is mistreatment. And I'll be honest, when the race and the Black Lives Matter conversations were hot button topics, I felt exhausted from talking about it so much. There was a period of time where I was having Zoom call after Zoom call about what it's like being Black. And at the time, I felt vulnerable and exposed, almost like an emotional scab had been picked off and my heart was left open. I'm sure many of you experience your share of those uncomfortable conversations. So I commend you for joining us today and continuing these tough conversations. Although these topics are heavy, they are necessary. And for that reason, it is important that before we begin, we take some time to pray and position ourselves to receive wisdom and guidance from the Lord. The wounds of racism run deep within many of us, but I truly believe in the power of the Holy Spirit to set us free and to unite us under the gospel of Jesus Christ. So let us pray. Lord God, we thank you for blessing us with another day. There were many that didn't see this day, and we're thankful that our names were on your wake-up list. God, I pray that you soften every heart. Jesus, I pray that as your prayer is recorded in John 17, that we will be sanctified by your truth, knowing that your word is the truth. I pray that we be of one mind and one spirit, and that our hearts on the matter of race will bring you glory. I pray that you would deliver us from the pain and trauma due to racism, and that you will uproot all of the negative thoughts we may hold about our brothers and sisters that don't look like us. Let us have forgiving hearts. Let us be open to giving and receiving unconditional love. Lord, let us look like your body. As the word says in Corinthians, remind us that there is no member of the body more important than the other. In your infinite wisdom, Lord, you designed us to be interdependent on one another. Thank you, God, for the power of the Holy Spirit to counsel us and to order our steps. James 1 says that if we ask you for wisdom, you'll give it to us. So God, we ask you today to give us wisdom. We ask that you will use the speakers to impart godly wisdom on all of us. And Lord, as we continue the heart-wrenching work of self-examination, please create in us clean hearts and remove all that is unlike you. When the enemy rears his ugly head to plant seeds of division, distrust, destruction, please, God, give us discernment and the power to cast down those thoughts so that we resist the enemy. Finally, God, be magnified in our time together, be the center of this conversation, be the center of our lives. And I pray all these things in the mighty name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you so much, Brittany. With that, let's introduce our panelists. This is Dr. Michael Emerson, who is, first of all, our beloved Mel's father-in-law. He is also a professor and the sociology department head at the University of Illinois at Chicago. In addition to Divided by Faith, he has authored 14 other books and nearly 100 publications. He also, as we mentioned before, formerly a professor at Rice, where apparently we overlapped for 1 year during my senior year there, but I unfortunately did not get to take any classes from him. But John and I think Christina had signed up for this class. I know y'all were students of Dr. Emerson, so lucky for y'all. This is Dr. Ruth Lopez Turley. So Rice is also a connecting point between Dr. Emerson and Dr. Ruth Lopez Turley. Dr. Emerson was instrumental in bringing Dr. Lopez Turley to Rice, where she is a professor of sociology, the associate director of the Kinder Institute for Urban Research, and the founder and director of Rice University's Houston Education Research Consortium, which uses research to help improve educational equity, which is awesome. She also founded the National Network of Education Research Practice Partnerships, which does this research to practice work nationally. And Dr. Lopez Turley is also one of our awesome Loving Houston advisors. And Pastor Bryant Lee. Pastor Bryant Lee is the founding senior pastor of Higher Expectations Church, where Brittany attends. Pastor Lee is also the one who introduced us to Brittany, so I am so grateful for that. Pastor Lee is a veteran, having served in the U.S. Army for 23 years. Thank you so much for your service, Pastor Lee. He's also the president of the Collaborative Fellowship. He's on the board of the Christian Life Commission for Texas Baptist, provides coaching and counsel to local pastors and leaders through Pastor Serve. And as we just learned, he is going to start a new role with Crew soon, which is awesome. So Pastor Bryant is also a former Loving Houston board member. He has so much great wisdom, and like Dr. Lopez Turley, applies that wisdom to real life, which I absolutely love. So without further ado, Dr. Emerson.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. So get this, I've been given 8 minutes to talk about the history of racism in our world. This is a very unique challenge. So let me make sense of such a term by stepping way back. So because we're fallen human beings, as God promises in our scriptures, life is a struggle for all of us. Making ends meet, getting education, staying healthy, dealing with aging, all a struggle. Not surprisingly, people, of course, look for ways to reduce these struggles. And this can be done most successfully, we have found, through groups and cooperation, working with other people. But again, because we're fallen, people most everywhere across all times make decisions and form groups that seem to address our struggles by getting as much as they can for our own group, even if it harms other groups and other groups get less. In my field of sociology, we use this term called opportunity hoarding, which it says that groups will hoard for themselves and their offspring, and usually it's justified by doing it for your children, opportunities and resources, even though it's clearly at the expense of other people.
They justify and enable doing so by using essentially the same trick. It says this: our group is superior, it works harder, it's better in some way, and other groups are inferior. They don't work as hard, they're worse in some way. Thus, that makes it okay.
It might surprise you that, at least from the European perspective, from the 1400s through about 1750, the major dividing line in the world was Christian and heathen. In Europe and in the colonies, Christianity was used as the marker between superior and inferior people. So in the 14 and 1500s, the Pope issued a series of edicts declaring what we call the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery authorized and obligated any Christian monarch who located non-Christian lands. It didn't matter if there were people there or not. The definition was it Christian or not? They were obligated to claim those lands and the resources on behalf of Christendom. So this doctrine of discovery gave a legal and a theological justification for Christian supremacy, expressed, as we know, in our history through colonization and hoarding. God's people alone should have access to the world's resources, was the understanding. It was the Christian duty to claim and to conquer. And claim and conquer they did. In this next slide, you will see just how effective it was. This is showing the nations that Europe, the purple, colonized, and basically it's the entire world. There's a couple of places it didn't reach. So, because this conquering and the subsequent Christianizing of other people was so successful, the categories of Christian and heathen no longer worked as well. People groups other than Europeans were being Christianized. So, especially if you have like a system of slavery, then that would mean they should be freed. So, about 1750, we actually made a switch. We started, instead of Christian supremacy, we went to race and racial supremacy. So, our nation's founders, all of whom were white, European, wove into our founding documents, right, about just 26 years later, the practices and assumptions of white superiority over all others. As they taught, differences between whites and others were very important. If we're going to do this grand experiment called democracy, it will only work if people are ruled by their minds and not their passions. And it was encoded and written, white people are ruled by their minds. They have self-control. People of color are ruled by their passions. They are unable to actually be citizens because they can't exercise self-control and enough thought to decide how to vote. So in our Constitution, there, we the people, citizenship is given only to this category: free white men who exhibit good moral character, where the good moral character is the nod to the previous system, which had just been 25 years prior, of the Christian-heathen divide. Only the superior group could be trusted with voting and other privileges of citizenship, such as owning land. Okay, so what is racism then? This big windup. We often think it's individual prejudice and discrimination of one person against another. So like, I don't like you because of your race. I'm not going to hire you because of your race. But such thoughts and acts are actually better viewed as what they are. They're racial prejudice and they're racial discrimination. So when I use the term racism, what I mean is it's a collective misuse of power by one racial group that results in harming other racial groups. Now, keep in mind for where we started. Oftentimes, the intent isn't necessarily to harm other racial groups. The intent is to reduce the struggle of the particular group in power to make their lives easier. But it has the end result of hurting other groups. So when you think of racism this way, it's far more potent and impactful than racial prejudice and discrimination are. And here's what's very important. Racism is evil, but it is not irrational. What does that mean? It means it won't go away by telling people don't be racist or be nice or by shaming them or by simply teaching them it exists. The reason is because racism actually does reduce the struggle for white Americans. So there are real tangible benefits. Note that I don't say that racism makes life easy for whites. No one ever has an easy life. Rather, what racism does is it makes life on average less hard for whites than for other groups. So how does it make life easier? Well, this slide will show you 30 different ways that whites currently in 2020 have advantages over other groups. Now, any one of these would be great and help to reduce struggle compared to other groups, but it's the compounding advantages of all of these combined that have just a massive impact and make such differences in our society, right? It allows opportunities to be hoarded for white folks, and again, most importantly, for children. Okay, so let me make these advantages more tangible. Go to the next slide. What I'm doing here is I've mapped income distributions by neighborhood in Houston here. You can see I put a line because basically we have a dividing line along 288. One side very poor, one side fairly wealthy. So where you see the red and the pink, those are areas that are the poorest in Houston. If I overlaid race, you would see that almost a perfect correlation between being Black neighborhood or Hispanic neighborhood and poor. And then the purple, those are white neighborhoods, and they're the wealthiest neighborhoods. That's what you'd expect given all the compounding advantages over several hundred years. Well, because of those compounding advantages, it's not just that race is associated with neighborhood, racial, and economic segregation, but those facts actually work to produce much greater wealth for whites. Let me give you a couple examples of that. So the next chart was a really interesting study. I'm jumping up to Milwaukee now. Asked a question and said, if for white and blacks, in Milwaukee 1971 was essentially 100% white or black. If you bought a home in 1971 for $40,000, how much was your home worth 22 years later in 1993? If for whites, the home in 1993 on average was worth 250,000, that's a wonderful profit. 210,000 have increased well. How about for blacks in Milwaukee? Their homes actually decreased in value. They lost money. They did the same thing, but they lost money. But you might say, well, you went from showing us Houston to Milwaukee, and that's from a long time ago, relatively speaking. And indeed, I had said that highly black areas tend to be poor areas. So it would make sense. People don't want to live there. That would drive down values. So let me personalize this. 2006, we moved to Fort Bend County. And I heard some of you are from there. And we moved into a new subdivision there. And here was our racial composition when we lived there. And you might think, well, what did this neighborhood look like? It was a solidly middle-class neighborhood. In 2012, so a little over 6 years later, we moved to Denmark. So we had to put our house up for sale. So when we bought our house in 2006, you can see what we paid for it. We weren't able to sell it for $273,000. We found a buyer for $225,000. Okay, and if you've sold a house, you know you have to get your house appraised. An appraiser who never came to our house simply said, based on the neighborhood you live in, you can't sell it for more than $160,000. So we couldn't sell it for the $225,000, and we had to sell it for what the appraiser said it was worth. And so the end result is our net wealth went down $113,000. What this illustrates is that despite my having all the potential benefits of being white, male, highly educated, well-employed, I'm working at Rice at this time, I can actually forfeit at least some of those advantages by not playing the game as it was set up for me to play. Where did I make a mistake? I was supposed to move to a white neighborhood, and then I would make money. Well, again, you might say, that's your individual experience. That's not really what happened in Houston overall. And I wondered that too. So I asked my top 2 graduate students at Rice at the time, I said, I want you to take that Milwaukee study, redo it, but do it better. Use the years 2005 to 2015, because that's when I asked them to do it. Look at Houston, and I want you to be more sophisticated using the fancy statistical techniques we have learned to control for things that differ between neighborhoods, like racial composition, income, poverty levels, school quality. And I only want to let you vary one thing, and that is the racial composition in the neighborhood, and then see what happens to housing values. And so here's what they found. So everything's the same, except we're looking at white, Hispanic, and black neighborhoods. All right, in that period, if you lived in a white neighborhood, you made $82,000 on average on your home. How about Hispanic neighborhoods? You actually lost a little over $4,000. And then for black neighborhoods, which ours would have been classified as, you lost on average over $26,000. Folks just doing all the same thing, right? Buying a house, living in a house, but because of race that exists, not individuals now, but in our systems, some people are making money, some people are losing money. What does this do for the struggle then of accumulating wealth? We can take a quick look here. Here's looking from 84 to 2007. That's showing black wealth over that time, essentially roughly about the same. How about for white wealth in comparison? It's not that whites are necessarily investing any better. They're making most of their money in their housing. And then they have more to invest, so even if they get the same returns. Okay, but again, you might say, well, that's before the housing crash, and that's 13 years ago now. Is it still that way? Our latest data is 2016, and here's the average wealth of white, Hispanic, and black. It's just an amazing gap, right? When I first saw this data in 2016, and since then, every talk I give, I show this and I say, this country will erupt. There's no evidence any nation can have this much inequality and it not blow up. And of course, that's what we have seen here this summer. So racism and its products, white advantage, for example, they have profound impacts in our history. But what I hope you can take away from this few minutes is that it has profound impacts today, all day, every day. And until we interrupt these, all of these accrued advantages are not going to stop. In fact, they'll only intensify, like we see here. And to all of this, I would have to say, as a Christian, it seems wholly unchristian to me. We have to change the tide. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Emerson. Now, Dr. Lopez Turley.
Hi, everyone. So like Michael, I've been tasked with giving you a quick overview of racial and ethnic inequities in education in 8 minutes. I normally take at least a semester to cover this information, but today I will just give you a big picture, and I mean like a really big picture. The main thing that I want to emphasize is that inequities, racial and ethnic inequities in education, are both systemic and systematic. And by systematic, I mean that they're by design. Historically speaking, this is how our predecessors have set up the system by design to be inequitable for different groups of students. And that is what we are still living with today. Once a system is set up in a certain way by design, it's very difficult to undo what our predecessors have done unless we make a very concerted, explicit effort to combat it. We can't just say, oh, this just kind of developed naturally. No, not at all. This was by design. So that's the first thing I want to emphasize. The second thing I want to emphasize, in addition to being systematic, is that it's systemic, meaning this is not unique. These inequities are not unique to any particular school or school district. These inequities are prevalent nationwide. If we were to take a step back and look at all the school districts in the entire country, for example, and make a scatter plot, one plot, put all the districts in one plot based on their average economic situation and the average achievement for students, this is what we would see. Each of these circles represents a school district in the United States, and it's hard to tell because there's so many, but the main thing you need to note is that there is a strong correlation. There's a very clear diagonal, meaning that there's a very strong correlation between the socioeconomic status, is the average socioeconomic status in each school district on the x-axis, and on the y-axis you see the average achievement in the if it's in the middle, it's about average for the national average, but then it's above. These are and in terms of grade levels. So one grade level above national average, 2 grade levels above national average, and so on. Next, you'll see where Houston ISD lands in this scatter plot. By the way, the size of the circle is indicative of the size of the school district. So Houston ISD is the 7th largest district in the country, so it's a pretty large circle in the scatter plot. You can see that in Houston, it actually lands right about where we might expect it given its average economic status. So given the economic status, we're just below the national average. But that's the whole district, everybody in the district. If we were to subdivide each of these districts by the race and ethnicity of their students, we see, first of all, there's still that correlation that we saw, the diagonal, where there's a very clear relationship where the higher the economic status, the higher the achievement. That's no surprise. But what this scatter plot shows us, now that we've subdivided the students by their race and ethnicity, we see a very clear pattern, literally a color-coded hierarchy in our nation, where we very systematically see that white students, which are represented by the pink circles, are both on average at a much higher economic status, just like what Michael was sharing earlier. But that is very strongly correlated with their performance in terms of their educational achievement. Below them, we see the blue circles, those represent Hispanic students. They tend to have a lower economic status and correspondingly lower achievement. And then the lowest we see represented by the green circles. These are Black students who systematically have the lowest economic status and correspondingly the lowest achievement. Statistically speaking, it is pretty much impossible for this to be a result of chance. This is not a result of chance, but rather this is a result of accumulation of very systematic and systemic inequities for our students, where students of specific racial and ethnic groups systematically have very different educational experiences relative to the experiences of other more advantaged groups. And I'm referring to both their educational experiences at home because of a lack of resources there, but also their educational experiences at school. This is not surprisingly, it should not be surprising to you all, that this is connected to resources, monetary resources, in addition to other types of resources. But just as this example, I want to share with you what the impact of monetary resources is. In this scatter plot, we see for each state in the US, the x-axis is the gap in funding between what each state provides for per pupil spending specifically for the poorest quintile of students in each state. So the bottom 20% in terms of their economic status. So for the poorest quintile of students in each state, the gap between what the states are actually providing in funding for these students relative to the amount of funding that would be needed if we were to get those students to national average. Okay, so that's the vertical red line. Then if we look at the y-axis, that's the gap in outcomes and educational outcomes for these poorest quintile of students. And the horizontal red line represents the national average in outcomes. So in essence, there are two things I want you to notice about this scatter plot. Again, there is a very clear relationship. There's a diagonal, clear relationship between the amount of funding that these states provide for our poorest students and their educational achievement. This is important to point out because there are some people, including some of our politicians and leaders in this state, that claim that you can't just throw money at the problem. That's not enough. Unfortunately, I think that's just being used as a lame excuse to not provide the funding that is needed because these are our poorest students. We cannot use that as an excuse. Here's the evidence. The more money you provide, the better they do. It's as clear as day. So we can't use that as an excuse to not provide adequate funding for our poorest students. The second thing that I want to highlight in this particular scatter plot is where Texas is. You see Texas, it's on the lower left quadrant of this scatter plot, meaning that in the state of Texas, if we want to get our poorest quintile of students up to national average outcomes, which by the way is a modest goal, if we want to get our poorest students up to national average outcomes, we would need to increase per pupil spending by over $12,000 a year per student. Now, to some people, that may sound like a lot of money, but it's not. We actually spend a lot more than that per year to imprison people in our country. A lot more than that. Why can't we spend that amount of money to adequately fund our students' education, especially our poorest students? We are doing a lousy job. This is a clear issue of an injustice, but also, to end on the same note that Michael ended on, it is morally wrong. And we as Christians, I don't have to point to any biblical verses that highlight the need to support the poor, the oppressed, the fatherless, the imprisoned. This makes it very clear that we are doing a lousy job of doing that. We can do a much better job of supporting our poorest students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lopez Turley. Pastor Bryant Lee.
Well, good morning, and I'm excited to be here. I want to thank my co-lecturers on this morning. What an honor to be with you on today. I want to talk to us real briefly just about something I can talk about forever. In fact, I'm in the middle of writing a book on church-school partnerships, racial reconciliation within church-school partnerships, and what we can do about it. You've heard this massive amount of information that is amazing when you consider that we are 6 decades later from the Supreme Court saying schools must be integrated. 6 decades later, and we're still having the same conversations, which really speaks to the data that we just heard. You know, if you go and you consider from 1619 to today, 401-year history in this nation of injustice and inequity. And I agree, it's not going to go away overnight because the history is too long. It's been sown too deep. Today, John Lewis, we're giving our final farewells to one of the greatest civil rights activists known in our modernity. And so I wanted to mention that. But here's some things to consider. Consider this, that in 2017, Cleveland, Mississippi, a town where most of my family is from, was graduating its first integrated class of students from one high school in 2017. That's not that far away. So when we hear about these racial issues, depending on which side of the fence we're sitting on, we sometimes think that could not be happening right now, especially if you're in a majority culture or you're in the upper suburban community where things all seem to be going well and right. But the reality of it is that we have a major problem still in our nation. I love this box by Crayola of crayons. It's the colors of the world. Just think, for years, kids have been trying to figure out from kindergarten all the way through high school doing art, how can I get somebody that looks like me? And this here is just even a recent discovery, a recent deal that's been put out where even large manufacturers have recognized that this is an issue. Let me just give you a couple of facts to go along with that. Racial segregation in schools is strongly linked to segregation by class. We know this, right? Nearly 90% of intensely segregated Black and Latino schools are schools with at least half of the student body that's economically disadvantaged. Now, we know that goes back to the whole ideal of redlining and how communities are set up and how that plays a role that gets us to this here place, right? Whites are the most segregated group in the nation's public school systems. Only 14% of white students attend a multiracial school. 14%. Where 3 or more racial groups are present. Residential segregation impacts schools with the decrease in busing to achieve school integration and overwhelming returns on neighborhood schools where life really matters. And so here's the deal. In my district where I'm at, right, we serve 11 Title I schools, which is about 17% of the humble 51,000 students. 74% of those students are economically disadvantaged. 89% of those students are African American, while 56% of those students are Latino descent. And listen, most of our Title I schools are in a 3 to 5 mile footprint. 3 to 5 mile footprint. And so when we begin to think about how do we begin to try to reconcile relationships between using the church-school partnership, we have to understand the history behind where we're at and what has got us there. Now, I'm a theologian. And a good theologian knows you need the Bible. And so for me, I think about Micah 6:8 that says, mankind, he has told you what is good and what is that the Lord's require, to act justly, to love faithfulness, and to walk humbly before your God. We're not called to sit on the sidelines in this issue. We're not called to stick our head in the sand. We're called to be the clarion voices of change and equality and justice. And we're called to be in this fight for the long haul. And so when I began to think about what does that look like in a school partnership, well, it's the majority culture school in the suburbs adopting a school in the inner city, but not from a place that we're coming to fix you. We're coming to come alongside of you to find ways that we can help improve not just the school, but the system as a whole. It's also seeing schools do more things integrated together in our districts. And so it's generally the voices from outside of the school board, from outside of the school system, that's going to allow them to think. Because you got to consider, in the midst of a pandemic and just in the day to day, administrators, teachers, staff, and even students are under a tremendous amount of pressure. So we're not always thinking through these things. And so that's where the church can come alongside a school, a district, a community, and say, these are issues that we have to talk about. We have to keep them out in front, even when they leave from behind where the media influence. So here are a couple of things I want to share that I think can help with the racial divide that we see in our nation, our country, our communities, our neighborhoods, and more particularly in our schools. First and foremost, you can adopt a school unlike the dominant culture that you live, work, and play in. You can volunteer in the school unlike the dominant culture that you live, work, and play in. And you can come to that school with the idea as a learner first, that I want to lean in to learn rather than to assume that people are just lazy or people don't want better or that everybody has an equal shot. I mean, here in my own district, I had a school, a Title I school, where when we went through this pandemic, they gave computers away. Then they realized that because of the racial divide, because of redlining, because of economic disadvantage, that I had homes where they didn't even have Wi-Fi, they didn't have hotspots. So you got kids with a computer and no way to get on the internet. Nobody thought through that. Principals were literally buying hotspots out of their own pocket so their kids can be educated. Then we had the issue of we gave one family a computer, but then we realized there's 3 kids in the house, right? Because these kids are broke off still today from the digital divide. Another thing that we can do with our church school partnerships, even if you don't have kids in the school, your kids are grown and gone, you can still attend PTA meetings and PTA rallies as a voice. You can create space for students, staff, and parents to have courageous conversations around race and inequities that we see in our district and in our schools. You can talk to your school board about how district lines are drawn that keeps, watch this here, economically disadvantaged students out of some of the newer, more advanced schools based off where they live. We have that throughout Houston. We can challenge school boards in areas of educational inequities. We can show up. We are the taxpayers. We are the tax base. We should have a hand. We should have a vote. We should have a voice in what's happening in our schools. We can mentor and learn from students and families of a different race. And not from a colonialism perspective where I'm coming because I got all this your stuff and this is a project, but because our hearts are poured that way and because the Bible tells us we're called to this. Most importantly, we can keep the conversation around race active and engaged. We can talk about history. Here's what I want you to consider why this is so important. If you have a people group who for hundreds of years were denied access, and then all of a sudden they get access, but then they're behind. And then when they do get school books, they don't see their history in those school books. All this here plays a role in keeping the inequities going. And so we have a role to play in this. Just beyond mentoring, beyond coaching, beyond meals, beyond coffee, we have got to begin to speak up if we want to see the educational playing field leveled. Churches have a tremendous base, a tremendous trust, a tremendous wealth sitting in the pews every day. We have to rally those people in our pews and in our seats to become a voice, to become a movement. What we hope to see with Love in Houston across our city is a movement of churches that are engaged across a wide spectrum of things that impact our school system. Because here's the deal. We, our group, the Collaborative Fellowship, we plant churches based off where diverse schools are at. We recognize that the schools are a microcosm view of what our communities look like and what we hope our communities to be. So I want to challenge us. Listen, get from behind the desk, get out of the pews, live beyond Sunday, Let's get in here. Let's fight the good fight. Let's make a difference. Let's speak truth to power. Let's see change take place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pastor Bryant. Right now, I'm going to give each panelist just a couple of minutes to respond to anything they heard. One of the wonderful things that I love about our panelists today is that you can tell that they're brilliant, but they also love Jesus. So that's why I wanted them specifically on this call today too, because we've heard about this stuff about racism and all of these things. What can we as Christians do? So I'll just start same order. Dr. Emerson, Dr. Lopez Turley, Pastor Bryant, if you guys each want to say a couple of things in response to what you've heard from the others.
Yeah, sure. I really appreciate those presentations and the data. What struck me was how interrelated they are. So often, like if Ruth was presenting on her own and she shows you, look, the wealthier neighborhoods, they do better in their scores. People might say, well, African Americans and Hispanics, they should work harder and make more money, and then they could be there or whatever. But you can see, as I'm talking about, these compounding advantages and disadvantages that then they spill over into school. And that's how we pass them on from one generation to another. It's just amazing to me that wealthy schools celebrate that they did well on the, is it called the STAR test these days in Texas? I don't know what it's called, but you should do well. And you got all the advantages possible. That's expected. It's when a school does well that isn't expected to. I think it's also easy to get overwhelmed. So you want to help a school. Maybe that's why you're on this call and you're part of that. What does all this hundreds of years of stuff and all this big data have to do with helping a school? It helps to know how to think about it. And so I just thought that Pastor Bryant really brought it home in terms of what that means for actually working individually with a school. It actually shapes then how you work with a school.
Thank you, Dr. Lopez Turley.
So I wanted to make a couple of comments. First of all, I agree with Michael, talking about how everything is so interconnected. One of the things that stuck out to me in the comments that Michael made, of course, we're both sociologists, so I use a lot of the same material, and I know these grad students that he was referring to. I'm thinking of Michael's personal story about what he did in investing in a property in a Black neighborhood and what it cost him, literally, in that it highlights that we live in racist systems, so that even if we as individuals want to do the right thing and not be racist, the fact is we still are a part of a racist system. Like in this case, when Michael and his family wanted to do the right thing, it cost them dearly because we live in a racist system where property values are based on racial composition instead of not just the normal things that we would think property values should be based on, like size or quality, whatever. But what really drives those property values, what really matters, is the racial composition of the neighborhood. So it's just a reminder of these systems that we live in that interact with our own individual decisions. And not in the same way, so now I'm thinking about Pastor Lee's comments about our role as Christians in all of this, and the role of the church with a capital C in all of this as well. We have to come to terms with the fact that unfortunately, historically, and of course still today, the church has not played a very positive role in all of this. And I'm saying it very nicely, right? Like, and my husband, by the way, is a church historian. So I hear from him about the history, like the long history of the church in, unfortunately, supporting these racist systems, despite all the evidence we have to the contrary in the Bible. We have selectively ignored passages in the Bible and then purposely taken other passages in the Bible out of context and used them to serve our purposes. Like, we just have to come to terms with that, both individually and also collectively as the church, and use what God has given us to counteract all these systems that we and our predecessors have set up. And I believe, of course, that's a tall order, but I do believe we can do it because we are tapped into the power of God, not our power, God's power. And with God's power, even though we see the data, like the stuff that I've shared with you today, it seems daunting. It seems like you just want to throw up your hands and be like, what am I supposed to do? That's too much. That is. But we're not alone. If we work together and with God, I truly and honestly believe that we can fix this, that we can do the right thing, because honestly, that's God's kingdom at work right now, whether we like it or not. That's why I love Mary's prayer, how it's about everything is going to be turned upside down. Well, that's exactly what we need right now, because the current system is so messed up that we need to literally turn it upside down to make things right. And I am confident that it may not, even if it's not in my lifetime, I'm confident that God is at work through all of this, and that I just hope that God can use us in some way to help bring about his kingdom.
Mr. Bryant.
Yeah, man, this has been awesome to hear Dr. Emerson and Dr. Lopez Turley, because often the church will say, we just need to preach the gospel. Well, the historical narrative tells us we need to preach the gospel, but we need to be mindful of the data. I was a healthcare recruiter in the Army, and one of the generals used to always tell us, numbers don't lie, people do. And so this idea that we can whitewash history, or in this age we live in, we can rewrite history. I love the fact that they have taken the time to do the research and the history on it, along with the scriptures. It puts us as a church in a different seat when we stand before the administrators and educators and talk to them about why this issue must be addressed. What I'm most excited about is that for the first time, I think we are peeking into a generation that already gets diversity, that already gets this. The historical fact, the social facts, the long history narrative. I think we are more positioned in this hour to write a different way forward than we've ever been. The challenge for us is going to be bringing all of that together, the theological, the historical, the social, and saying, how do we bring this together to move the ball down the court, rather than sitting in boardrooms with our pie charts saying, about the next meeting. So it's on the church. I agree with Dr. Lopez. It is the church's responsibility. And if the church is going to be relevant in the 21st century among the next generation, they're going to have to see us active. And there's no better place for us to show up in force than where our kids spend most of their day, 39 weeks out of the year, and sometimes more, depending on how disadvantaged they are in the education system, us being a very present helper in those places. And here's the beautiful part. The schools are begging us to come. And on a call like today, we don't come ignorant. We come well-educated, well-resourced, right, so that we can speak to the issues that are most pressing to their hearts. Man, I'm so honored and so grateful to be here in this moment. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you to our panelists for sharing and spending your time with us today. A lot of churches are represented on this call, and a lot of our churches are trying to discern, as John Lynn is saying, how to leverage resources, capital, towards the work of racial justice and racial righteousness. And so this question is for, I think, the panelists and Living Houston staff even. But what do you think are the unique opportunities that church-school partnerships specifically have compared to other avenues that a church community might explore?
Yeah, so I believe that the church-school partnerships, as it relates to racial righteousness and racial justice, because churches have this unique ability to be influencers in the lives of young people. Often in the schools that we work in, I've been invited into meetings with counselors, with families. I've been invited into meetings to speak on national issues to students. And you come with that, not necessarily that your Bible is open, but you come with a biblical worldview. And because we hold to a biblical worldview, the voice that we have on these issues speaks to God's righteousness and to the fact that all people are created in the image and likeness of God and therefore have value. And so we get to be a voice for those who necessarily can't have a voice. Sometimes principals' hands are tied. And when you have a strong church partnership, your church partner can speak to things that the principal cannot speak to for a variety of reasons that I won't get into here right now.
Thanks, Pastor Lee. I would agree with that and add one more thing, and that is that if you look at research on volunteering and giving, charitable giving, the people that give the most and volunteer the most are people of faith. So it makes sense in many ways, right, to partner with churches, with people who are predisposed perhaps to want to give and to want to volunteer. And I would add that there are some tools that my research team is involved in developing right now in partnership with HISD that will be available next month, that really will be able to be used by churches and other community members who want to support schools and want to know exactly what the student needs are. So we are developing an interactive website tool that for every school in the district, you can like click on a particular, kind of like the map that Marilyn, that you showed earlier about where all the schools were, but you can find out what the needs are in those particular schools, as well as who the nearby service providers are if you want to support a particular service provider, or if you want to know what the specific needs are in those schools. So I would encourage you all to take advantage of that tool if you're looking for that kind of information.
Another question from Pastor Icky. Where are the Asians in the Black, brown, and white conversation? And then additionally, what about gentrification? I've seen white investors raise home prices in the third ward. And when he and his wife moved to Houston, they were priced out of living in the third ward. Do Black families profit at all from gentrification? He's guessing no.
Where are the Asians? That's always such an interesting question. And we're right now in the middle of a big national research project looking at the 4 major racial groups and trying to figure out how they're aligning. So here's the deal. So Asians are actually the most educated group in the United States. They, as households, make more than whites. As individuals, they make less than whites. So they are able to make more than whites by having more education and having more workers within a household. They have about half the wealth overall as white folks on average, white families. Here's what we're finding. In attitudes and actions, Asians are very similar to whites in this country, unless something happens, like the coronavirus. So let me make that clear, what happens. So what is clear is that in the United States, we have a system that's this. It is white superiority, white dominance that's happened for hundreds of years, as we talked about. We have what we call anti-Blackness. We have a group of Native Americans who are basically forgotten about. They're mentioned quite a bit in the Constitution as not fully people either, basically forgotten. When people come and immigrate to the United States, they quickly see this. We see this over and over in interviewing people. They quickly know you need to align yourself, if you can, with white folks, and you need to avoid Black folks. They say it to us. They say it to us as straight as that. Asians have done the very best currently of aligning themselves where they live, how they do education, and so on, with white folks. But what they cannot seem to do is be able to be American. So no matter what, as soon as there's a problem, they're quickly seen as a foreign group, no matter all these other successes that they've had. So it's a dicey thing, and it depends on what's going on in the world, whether they're very close to whites or being pushed away.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Do you have any data supporting how they're involved in racial conversations today?
Yeah, so in terms of racial attitudes, they align very closely with whites. So they typically, and again, we're talking about averages, right? There's all kinds of variation, but they're much closer in subscribing to anti-Blackness and to saying that the way to change is just work harder and such.
I think there was a question in there also about do Blacks benefit at all from gentrification?
You can benefit from gentrification, not if you stay. It's only if you sell, in a way, right? If you stay, then your taxes go up. But if you sell, you have a chance to make a greater profit than you otherwise would.
Yeah, and so I'm working through the Collaborative Fellowship with churches in gentrified areas on starting community development corporations to buy property and land so that minorities can benefit by staying the fact that minorities are either forced out because they can't afford the taxes or forced out because they can't keep up changes the whole landscape of a community. So often we are not benefiting through gentrification at all. In fact, when the community gets almost 50%, we tend to be harassed more by the police for things that we've been doing in the community forever, like barbecuing in your driveway. You know, things just switch up really, really fast. And let me speak to this. The church can have a role in the gentrification conversation and the gentrification inequities if we would take some of our dollars and invest back in those communities. And I know Icky came from a church that was very well involved, and he's still involved with pastors in that community. And so it's funny, we have to help the churches stay in these communities. The churches become irrelevant and obsolete in communities because they can't keep up with the gentrification patterns that are happening.
That's right. I did want to mention, and John, you had asked us about specifically around church school partnerships. I really do feel like, and a couple of the speakers had mentioned this, but in the context of a church school partnership, we have the opportunity to build relationships with a diverse group of people. And we have an opportunity to see all sorts of inequities within our schools, within the neighborhoods. And then having conversations like this allows us to see things on a systemic level. So I feel like the church school partnerships allow us to see things on a very personal, direct, one-on-one, family, individual level, which we can also advocate for and help and figure out what the systemic things are causing some of these challenges to be happening. And then we have conversations like this where we can pull back and say, okay, what are the systemic things that we can all come together to address? So actually, Dr. Lopez Turley, I was wondering, you mentioned about funding. What are some things that we can do to help make sure that each student is able to get more funding? Is there some sort of specific advocacy work that we could work together to put our voices towards?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would suggest there are two approaches. There's sort of like a micro level approach and then a macro level approach. On the micro level, it's kind of like the stuff that I mentioned earlier, like, hey, there are tools out there to help you understand what the local needs are, and then local churches can give toward addressing those needs. And usually these are like the more immediate needs, like students need devices and the right number of devices, and they need more hotspots, and they need, and these are urgent needs. I don't want to downplay them. They're very important, immediate needs. But at the same time, we can't just do that. I think that that's important, but it's insufficient. At the same time, we also need to advocate for more and more equitable state funding. So notice there are two different things there: more funding and also more equitable state funding. And then there are things that we can do, right, to reach out to our legislators who I know are currently not in session, but actually right now is a good time to reach out to them because they're not in session and they're actually collecting information to be ready when the session starts. And in particular, because of our current economic challenges, it's more important than ever to advocate for more and more equitable funding for education, because it is at risk of getting cut because of our economic challenges right now. But I believe that if we were to cut education funding, we're just going to shoot ourselves in the foot and make our future economic situation worse. So I understand our legislators are in a very difficult situation. They're having to make very hard choices. But the fact of the matter is that it is precisely because we are facing the current economic challenges that we need to make sure that we don't cut funding for education, because then it's just going to make things worse in terms of our economy. The only way that we can get out of this mess in the long run is to make sure that everyone has access to equitable educational experiences. So yes, now is a great time to reach out to our legislators. That is something that I'm currently working on. Actually, I had a conversation with, for example, Senator Taylor this morning, and have a series of meetings with legislators in order to advocate for, at the very least, not cutting education funding, but ideally giving more funding for education.
Awesome. So, Dr. Lopez Turley had mentioned this earlier, but one of the awesome things about the fact that we are believers, that we are churches, is that we serve a great God, a great, powerful God who, despite all of these things, he is still in control and he's still sovereign. So, I wanted to allow Brittany to lead us now in a time of prayer.
Thank you, Dr. Emerson, Dr. Turley Lopez, and my shepherd, Pastor Lee. You all have done us a great service by sharing with us today. So thank you to all of you who asked those valuable questions. And we began our time in prayer. So as Marilyn said, let's close out our time in prayer. We'll have 3 prayer points based on the information our speakers just presented. Dr. Emerson discussed the history of racism in the U.S., Houston, and even currently right now we're experiencing. So aren't you glad that history doesn't have to define us forever? And so it may seem daunting, but as Marilyn just said, we serve a mighty and powerful God. And so our first prayer point is forgiveness. And in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus modeled prayer by saying, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And so the truth is, we all have this debt of sin that Jesus paid for with his blood. So let's pray that we can forgive one another just as Christ has forgiven us. BJ, will you lead us in this prayer?
Lord, I know sometimes it's really hard to forgive other people in a world where there's so much hurt and there's woundedness and there's people that are acting foolish and we're acting foolish, that sometimes it's hard to forgive. We do pray for that extra strength to be able to daily remember the forgiveness you've given to us and to operate out of what we know to be true from us, that you would help us to get to the root of why it's hard for us to forgive, that we wouldn't just go around hanging on to bitterness or struggling all the time to forgive, but that you would help us to identify what it is, the source of pride or the place, the vows or the wounds that we might have, they get triggered, so that we can deal with the root of our unforgiveness, and that you would sustain us and be close to us as we operate in forgiveness towards others. In the name of Jesus.
So our second prayer point is for our students. Dr. Turley Lopez spoke with us about how racism impacts our educational systems. So let's pray that our children will be overcomers, and that through church school partnerships, the church can advocate for fairness in our schools, which is what we just talked about. Jesus said, truly, I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. That's Matthew 18:40. Our director, Marilyn, will lead us in prayer for our students. And again, you may unmute yourself if you would like to pray after her.
Father, Lord, I thank you that you are a sovereign God, and it pains me to see the world that we're living in, and it pains me to see that our children are seeing the world that we're living in as well. Father, I pray so much that you will help us as adults to advocate, to look at the system, and to see what needs to be different so that our children can grow up in a very different world than we're living in right now, Father. It's frustrating to see that things have not changed over the past several generations. And I pray, Father, that this would be a moment in time where things can be different. And I pray that for our sakes, but I pray that for the sakes of our children especially. I pray for each child in each school across Greater Houston, Father. I pray, Lord, that the pain and the turmoil that they're experiencing because of the things that they're seeing in our world and our society, I pray that they would be able to use that to change the world as well, Father. I pray this in Jesus' name.
God, I pray for your Holy Spirit to be among us and help us to see the world in the way that you see the world. Remove the lenses that we normally use to see the world in very selfish and self-serving ways, but rather give us eyes to see the world the way you see it, with the love that you have for this world. with the compassion that you have, with the mercy that you have for every single person in this world. May we be blessed with such sight.
God, I just thank you that you do give us forgiveness, that you offer forgiveness through your Son, Jesus Christ. And Lord, I just ask that you would forgive us now if we have contributed to any racial injustice. Lord, open our eyes, give us wisdom and discernment to see where it is happening, Lord, and help us to be humble and to recognize our weakness and to recognize where we contribute to any of that, God. Lord, I just pray for each and every child across Houston. As Marilyn said, Lord, I pray that each and every child would feel the full value of how much you love them, how much you have a plan for them. God, that they are made in your image and that they were knitted together and formed in their mother's womb. God, that you would put people in their life every single day to show them their worth and their value, regardless of where they live, regardless of the color of their skin. And God, I ask that you would help our churches to just extend that hand of love to show each and every child that they are worthy and that they have so much to offer and that you have formed them for such a time as this and that you have great plans for them, God. And we cling to that in your word in Jeremiah 29:11. We know that you have great plans and they are not to harm us, but to prosper us, to give us a future and a hope. And we pray that over our children now, that they would have a hope and a future, a hope that comes only from you, and that we could be the light to show them that.
Amen. So our last prayer point is for the efficacy of our churches. Matthew 5:13-16. You are the salt of the earth, but if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Pastor Lee gave us sound wisdom on how the church can be effective in combating racism. Melissa will lead us in prayer and praying for our churches.
Yes, Lord, you prayed for your church, that we would be one, like you and your Father are one, so that the world would know that you are God. And Lord, we've been fighting against the same powers and principalities throughout all of history that have perpetuated the lie of racism and the sin of racism. And God, we know that this has muddied up our light. We've lost saltiness because of this. And so as your church, Lord, we cry out asking for your forgiveness. We confess that we have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed by what we have done and what we have left undone. We have not loved you with our whole heart when we've let sin get in the way, and we have not loved our neighbors as ourselves. And so we are sorry and we repent. And Lord, we know that you offer forgiveness and that you've been at work in every single person represented here on this call, on every church represented on this call. You've been at work. Your spirit has been at work long before they joined today. But Lord, I pray that this call, this time would continue to inspire them to take next steps, long strides to combat the evil of racism. Lord, would you equip all of our churches in partnerships with wisdom to know how they can uniquely position themselves to come alongside their school partner and be an ally, be an advocate, and see more of your kingdom here on this earth. We thank you for your grace, Lord, and we thank you for your spirit. We thank you for each person on this call. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Awesome. Thank you so much for leading that, Brittany. I've talked about our district coordinators today. They are an amazing resource for your district. If you're interested in starting or deepening a partnership with the school, they are great resources. lovinghouston.net/get involved has all of their contact information there. Thanks so much for joining us today. I'm going to ask Pastor Bryant if you would close us out in prayer today.
Father, we thank you and praise you and magnify you so much for this day. Father, we thank you for the grace that you've placed upon our lives, for your loving kindness and tender mercies. As we go today, God, Father, may the Lord bless and keep us. May the Lord make his face to shine upon us. May the Lord be gracious to us. May the Lord turn his face towards us. And may the Lord continue to give us peace. This we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.